The year is 1531. A French mathematician sits in his Paris study, surrounded by ancient texts and half-finished calculations. Outside, the Seine drifts quietly past. Inside, he is drawing a continent that no living human has ever seen. Not its coastline, not a guess at its general shape. He is drawing its mountain ranges, its river systems, the bays where its coastlines curve inward, the estuaries where rivers meet the sea. He is drawing Antarctica, without ice. And 300 years later, when scientists drill through 2 miles of frozen silence and map the bedrock beneath, they will find that he was right. This is not a story about one lucky map. This is a story about 5 of them. 5 maps created across 5 centuries, in 5 different countries, by 5 different people who should not have known what they knew. Someone knew this world before history says it was possible. And tonight, we're going to find out who. Map 1, the Orontius Phineas map, 1531. His name was Orensfine, royal mathematician, to King Francis I of France, professor at the College Royal, a man who calculated longitude and latitude, designed scientific instruments, and published precise astronomical tables. He was not a dreamer. He was not a myth maker. He was one of the most rigorous scientific minds of the 16th century, and in 1531, he published a world map that should be impossible. The map is elegant. It uses a double cordiform projection, a heart-shaped design that splits the globe into 2 lobes. The known continents spread across the parchment in careful, measured detail. But at the bottom of the map, centered on the South Pole, Fine drew an entire continent. Not a vague smudge, not a theoretical placeholder. An entire continent, with mountain ranges rising from its interior, rivers flowing from highlands to the sea, bays indenting its coastline. Coastal features render with the confidence of someone working from real data. He drew Antarctica without ice. Now here's the problem. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, nearly 3 centuries after Fine put on his map. No European expedition had reached it. No official record places any ship anywhere near those latitudes before the 19th century. So where did the data come from? Let's start with the size. Fine shows the Antarctic continent at approximately 6,500 miles across. The actual width of Antarctica is 5,500 miles. For a 16th century scholar drawing a continent that wasn't supposed to exist, that is a remarkable estimate. But the precision goes much deeper than size. The map depicts mountain ranges in roughly the correct position for the Transantarctic Mountains, a massive range that divides the continent into east and west. Those mountains weren't confirmed by expeditions until the 20th century. The map shows rivers flowing from interior highlands down to the coast. This seemed like pure fantasy until the International Geophysical Year's seismic surveys of 1957 and 1958 revealed subglacial river valleys in similar positions, beneath the ice. Coastal features, bays and inlets and estuaries. They match the bedrock topography mapped by modern seismic reflection techniques. There's even a large indentation on one side that corresponds to the position of the Ross Sea and the Ross Ice Shelf. In the 1960s, researcher Charles Hapgood published an analysis that included testimony from United States Air Force cartographers, military analysts, not amateur enthusiasts, who compared Fine's map to seismic survey data and confirmed that features on his Antarctic continent matched subglacial geography in specific, measurable positions. These were not people with an ideological reason to validate ancient mysteries. They were technical analysts reporting what the data showed. The standard academic explanation is that Fine was simply illustrating an old idea. Ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle had theorized about a southern landmass needed to balance the northern continents. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. Medieval and Renaissance cartographers inherited this idea and drew speculative southern continents as a kind of geographical placeholder. According to this view, any resemblance to actual Antarctica is coincidental. The mountains and rivers are artistic flourishes, not data. But Fine wasn't drawing mythology. He was a mathematician who worked in specific coordinates. When his Antarctic continent is overlaid on a modern map using projection mathematics of his era, the interior features don't scatter randomly. They correlate with subglacial geography in specific positions. If Fine was guessing, he made thousands of individual choices about where to place mountains, rivers, and coastal bays. The probability of randomly placing them where they actually exist beneath 2 miles of ice is not a rounding error. It is astronomically small. Fine never explained his sources. He was known to use ancient texts and worked during a period when Renaissance scholars were rediscovering documents preserved in Byzantine archives and monastery libraries, knowledge that had survived the fall of Rome through centuries of careful copying. The question is not whether he had sources. The question is how old those sources were, and whether somewhere beneath the politics and the fires and the wars that consumed so many libraries, fragments of a much older map survived long enough for a French mathematician to copy them onto gazelle skin in 1531. Map 2, the Cantino Planisphere, 1502. October 1502. Lisbon, Portugal. A man named Alberto Cantino is about to commit an act of espionage that could get him executed. He is not a sailor. He is not a cartographer. He is an agent working for the Duke of Ferrara in Italy, and he has spent months in the Portuguese court doing what spies do: observing, bribing, waiting. Tonight, he finally has what he came for: a map, rolled tight, hidden in cloth, the most protected cartographic secret in the most secretive naval empire in the world. If the guards catch him, he dies. But what he is carrying out of Lisbon will prove something extraordinary. Someone knew this world before Europe claims to have discovered it. The Cantino Planisphere is now housed in the Biblioteca Estense in Modena, Italy. It is the oldest surviving Portuguese nautical chart showing post-Columbian discoveries. Created by anonymous cartographers in 1502, it was commissioned by Cantino on behalf of his employer and smuggled out of Portugal at enormous personal risk. The question is why? If this map simply showed a couple of years of Brazilian coastal surveys, why did King Manuel, the first of Portugal, react with documented fury when he learned of the theft? Why did Portugal guard navigation data under penalty of death? Why did pilots require security clearances just to access charts? You do not kill people over ordinary maps. Look at what the map actually shows. The Brazilian coastline. Brazil was officially discovered by Pedro Alvarez Cabral in 1500, just 2 years before this map was created. Yet the coastline extends thousands of miles, from approximately 5 degrees north latitude all the way down to 35 degrees south, with geographic precision that suggests decades of exploration rather than 2 years. Portuguese records show official exploration had only reached 28 degrees south by 1502. Someone mapped the rest. Whoever they were, they are not in the history books. The African coastline is shown from the Mediterranean all the way around Cape of Good Hope and up the east coast, with accuracy that matches Vasco da Gama's voyage data, but exceeds what was officially published. The Indian Ocean coastlines, India, Ceylon, Southeast Asia, are rendered with remarkable precision for such an early date, and the longitude placement. Without chronometers, which wouldn't be invented for another 2.5 centuries, European cartographers of 1502 had no reliable method for determining accurate east-west positioning. Longitude was an unsolved problem. Yet on this map, Brazil, Africa, and India are positioned relative to each other with correctness that shouldn't exist. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. The map represents cutting-edge European exploration compiled from Portuguese pilot reports, Spanish Caribbean data, and existing Mediterranean charts. The accuracy reflects concentrated effort during an intensive period of exploration from 1497 to 1502. Portuguese records are incomplete, so some surveys simply aren't documented. But Portuguese records show only limited coastal voyages by 1502. They hadn't completed surveys of southern Brazil's full coastline, yet the map shows it. King Manuel's fury when he learned of the theft was not the reaction of a man who'd lost 2 years of survey data. It was a reaction of a man who'd lost something far more valuable. What was on this map that was worth killing to protect? One possibility is that Portuguese and Spanish exploration was far more advanced than publicly acknowledged. They may have been secretly mapping coastlines years, perhaps decades, before official discoveries, maintaining competitive advantages over rival powers. Portugal and Spain divided the world between them with the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. Whoever had better maps controlled everything. Another possibility is darker. Portuguese navigators may have had access to older charts from Venetian, Roman, or Arab sources, providing reconnaissance maps before they even sailed. Maps that showed them where to go before they officially went there. And then there is the most uncomfortable question of all. Did Portugal know about Brazil before Cabral? Did they suppress the full extent of their discoveries, keeping the knowledge classified until the timing was politically useful? If so, the Cantino planisphere is not just a stolen map. It is evidence that the age of discovery was, at least in part, a performance, a carefully timed reveal of knowledge that powerful people have been sitting on for years. Map 3. The Cagnito map, 1402. The year is 1402. The Joseon dynasty. Korea. 2 scholars named Iho and Kwon Gun are working in the Royal Bureau of Astronomy and Cartography, assembling a world map for the royal court. Korea is shown in meticulous detail. That makes sense. It is their homeland. China and Japan are rendered with careful accuracy, expected given centuries of exchange and diplomacy. But they have also drawn India, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. And Africa's shape on this map, its elongated form tapering correctly toward the south, is more accurate than any European map will produce for another 100 years. These scholars have never sent ships to Africa. They have never met a European cartographer. They have never sailed the Indian Ocean. Yet there it is. The Cagnito, formerly the Anogani Yatigukdo Jidu, is the oldest surviving Korean map of the world. The original is lost, but 2 15th century copies survive in Japan, one at Rukkoku University and another at Honkoji Temple. The map's preface is explicit about its sources. It was compiled from Chinese, Japanese, and Islamic cartographic traditions, a synthesis of knowledge from across the known world, assembled by scholars who understood that geography was not the exclusive property of any single civilization. Here is what makes the map impossible. The African continent is depicted with remarkably accurate proportions, the correct elongated shape, the correct tapering toward the south. Africa is shown with proportions closer to reality than Islamic or Chinese maps of the same era, maps produced by civilizations that had actually been there. This accuracy arrives 93 years before the Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, decades before European maps showed Africa's correct shape, and long before Korea had any documented maritime contact with the African continent. The mainstream explanation relies on the transmission of knowledge through trade networks. Islamic cartographers had explored and mapped Africa's east coast through centuries of maritime commerce. Chinese travelers had reached India and the Middle East via the Silk Road. This knowledge circulated through the scholarly networks connecting the Islamic world, China, and Korea. Iho and Kwon Gun were simply synthesizing the best available second-hand information. But here's the problem with that explanation. Islamic maps of the 15th century do not show Africa with this level of accuracy. They render northern Africa well, the regions they had traded with for centuries, but they distort sub-Saharan Africa, making the continent too wide or misshaping the southern portions. Chinese maps of the era are even less accurate for Africa. The Cagnito is not copying inferior sources and somehow producing superior results. It is showing Africa better than the civilizations that had actually been there. How does that happen? One possibility involves ancient Mediterranean knowledge traveling eastward. Roman traders reached India regularly. Roman coins have been found across South Asia and Southeast Asia. Roman geographical knowledge, which was considerably more accurate about Africa than medieval European maps. could have survived in Arabic texts after the Islamic conquest, later reaching Chinese and Korean scholars through Silk Road exchanges. There's another possibility that carries more weight. Phoenician mariners, working under commission from Egyptian pharaohs, reportedly sailed completely around Africa as early as 600 BC. Herodotus recorded this voyage. He was skeptical of one detail, that the sailors reported the sun on their right as they rounded the southern tip, which would only be possible in the southern hemisphere, and his skepticism is itself evidence of authenticity. A fabricator would not have included a detail that seemed impossible to a Mediterranean audience. If Phoenician mariners circumnavigated Africa 600 years before Christ, they had the coastline. They knew its shape. Could fragments of that knowledge have survived? In Egyptian archives, in Phoenician records, in the libraries of Carthage, eventually filtering through Roman scholarship into Arabic texts, through Chinese imperial archives, and finally onto a Korean map in 1402? Civilizations rise and fall. Libraries burn. But knowledge has a way of surviving. It travels with merchants. It hides in monastery collections. It gets copied by monks who don't fully understand what they're preserving. It crosses the Silk Road in the margins of trade documents and the memories of navigators. The Cognito might be the longest surviving paper trail of forgotten geography. Knowledge passing hand to hand across continents and centuries until two Korean scholars assembled it into something their era had no right to possess. Map 4, the Fra Mauro map, 1450. The monastery island of Murano, near Venice. A Camaldolese monk named for Mauro is completing what will become the most detailed world map of his era, 6 feet and 4 inches in diameter. More than 3,000 individual annotations. A circular masterpiece of accumulated knowledge. He has done something unusual. He has placed south at the top, not as a mistake, not as an artistic quirk, as a statement. Because his sources, ancient Arabic texts, Chinese accounts, Roman charts, show the world from perspective that medieval Europe has forgotten. And Fra Mauro is honest enough to follow his sources, even when they contradict the comfortable conventions of his time. Those sources tell him something else. Something that contradicts official history so directly that it has been debated for centuries. They tell him that a European ship sailed completely around the southern tip of Africa in 1420. 68 years before Bartolome Dias would officially be credited with that discovery. Fra Mauro died in 1464. He was a Venetian monk who ran a professional cartography workshop serving clients across Europe. Not a dreamer scribbling in a private journal, but craftsmen producing maps for people making life-and-death navigation decisions. The map was commissioned by King Afonso V of Portugal. That detail matters. Portugal was actively exploring the African coast. They were not commissioning maps for decoration. They wanted the best available geographical intelligence. What did Fra Mauro give them? The Indian Ocean is rendered with surprisingly accurate proportions. The Indian subcontinent, Ceylon, Southeast Asia, and Indonesia shown in positions and shapes that would not appear in European official cartography for decades. The African coastline extends all the way to the Cape of Good Hope, 38 years before Dias officially rounded it. And then there's the annotation. Buried in Fra Mauro's 3,000 notes is a specific claim. A European vessel, identified as Portuguese or possibly Genoese, sailed around the southern tip of Africa in 1420. He does not present it as rumor. He presents it as documented fact derived from sources he trusts. If that annotation is accurate, Portugal knew the shape of Africa decades before it was officially known. They had the route to the Indian Ocean. They knew what lay beyond the Cape, which raises a question that historians have never fully resolved. If you already know the route, why spend 50 years officially discovering it? The answer might be politics. Knowledge is power only when others don't have it. If Portugal officially announced the route to India in 1420, every other maritime power in Europe would immediately begin competing for it. By keeping the knowledge secret, exploring the coast slowly, officially in full public view, they could establish legal claims, build strategic infrastructure, and control the trade routes before their rivals even knew what was at stake. The age of discovery on this reading was not discovery at all. It was strategic publication of information Portugal had been sitting on for generations. From Morrow explicitly and repeatedly cites ancient sources throughout his annotations. He references ancient ones, scholars and geographers who predate medieval Europe. He was not vague about this. He was telling his readers directly that the knowledge on his map did not originate with him. When Portuguese explorers finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, they reportedly found ruins of ancient stone pillars along the coast. Not Portuguese pillars. Not any known European construction. Someone had been there before. Someone had marked the route. The Phoenicians, working for Egyptian pharaohs, reportedly sailed around Africa in 600 BC. Roman traders reached India regularly via the Red Sea. Arab navigators mastered the Indian Ocean centuries before Europeans arrived. The knowledge accumulated, circulated, and was preserved in the Great Library at Alexandria, in Byzantine imperial archives, in monastery collections across the Mediterranean world. And somewhere in that chain of transmission, a Venetian monk absorbed it all and put on a map in 1450 that showed the world as it actually was. Decades before the official story says anyone was supposed to know